Now, we're moving on. Wandering Essos, which is where Tyrion and Varys are right now. They've arrived in Pentos after shipping themselves across the Narrow Sea and are staying at Magister Illyrio's home, which is where Khaleesi lived right before she married Khal Drogo way back in Season 1. And Tyrion and Varys plan to make their way to Meereen to help Khaleesi rule and hopefully make it back to Westeros and successfully take the Iron Throne with her. Now, Tyrion is on a drunken binge, and while on the road, he insists on stopping for some ale and a hooker at this brothel, where we learn that Ser Jorah, who's been exiled from Meereen by Khaleesi, is also at this particular brothel. During an evening of revelry and drunkenness, Tyrion wanders away to use the bathroom. During this moment away from Varys, Ser Jorah takes the opportunity to kidnap Tyrion and throw him in a boat, and Tyrion finds out they're going to Meereen anyway, so he's not too concerned other than being a prisoner. And though Jorah doesn't really talk at all, Tyrion figures out who he is because he's very smart, and knows his story and knows who he is. Tries to engage him in conversation, and of course Jorah really just shuts it down and wants nothing to do with him. They're still heading in the right direction as far as Tyrion's concerned, so he cooperates, and the two of them continue on their little journey. He is concerned about a lack of wine because he's an alcoholic, but those are the least of his problems. Anyways, after sailing for a couple of days, their boat approaches the smoking seas outside of Valyria. Now, this area is considered a haunted, deadly mess after the Doom caused the civilization to fall. Now, when they say Doom, think massive volcanoes and eruptions and earthquakes, basically swallowing the city, killing everyone, and the dragons too. And so they sail into the smoking seas thinking to avoid pirates, who obviously are going to avoid that area. And instead they run into some peeps with a really bad, crazy case of grayscale, which is the same disease that Stannis' young daughter has on the one side of her face. Now, these men they're called stone men because this particular disease takes over your body, makes you look as if you're carved of stone, and takes your mental capacity away from you. So these guys are crazy, extremely violent, and carrying a very contagious disease. If they touch your skin, basically, you get it. And if you don't, it's like a miracle. So they are crazy. They attack the boat as it passes, with Jorah and Tyrion on it. Briefly before this, we see Drogon flying in the air, and we also see Tyrion react to seeing a dragon for real. It's like the light bulb went on in his head and all of the tales are true. He's finally understanding what the end game for this is going to be and how Daenerys and her dragons are going to be able to come to Westeros and bring it together and win the war for the Iron Throne. Anyway, they get set upon by the Stone Men. Things go awry. Tyrion falls overboard and loses consciousness, drowning. And then the next scene we see in this most recent episode is Jorah has rescued Tyrion. They're on the beach. Tyrion is not affected by the grayscale, but we see later that Jorah is. That he has a patch of grayscale on his wrist, and eventually will turn into one of the crazy stone men down the line. And that's it for them. Unfortunately, we don't know much what's going to go on a little bit later down the road. They kind of lay out for us that now their purpose has been renewed after seeing Drogon and having the scuffle. Hopefully they'll make it to Meereen in one piece. And moving on to Meereen, Khaleesi is struggling to maintain control over the city. She wants the Sons of the Harpy, who are the golden masked murderous dudes, to cease their terrorizing on her freedmen and unsullied warriors, whom they're killing off, picking them off one by one. And at the same time, Hizdahr Zolorak, who's the Meereenese emissary with the jacket and the weird beard, who's always fighting for opening the fighting pits, she speaks with him again about opening the pits, and again she says, no, I'm not sending my freedmen to get murdered just for your own entertainment. And Hizdahr really argues that the tradition of the pits and, the honor of fighting to the death is going to bring the city back together and bring peace to Meereen. She refuses, calling this practice barbaric, and meanwhile, the Harpies continue their reign of terror. Khaleesi's advisors, who, Daario, her hot lover, and Sir Barristan, the old man, both urge her to reopen the pits in favor of making peace and tradition and bringing all of that back to Meereen, but still she says no. She orders Grey Worm, the captain of the Unsullied, to do an investigation on this house where they have reports that one of the Sons of the Harpy are living. And he brings Daario with him, and they find one of the Sons of the Harpy, bring him back to the castle, and Khaleesi has him imprisoned for further questioning. Now, before this man can be questioned, unfortunately, her emissary for the freedmen, a former slave who is now on her council, he goes to the dungeons and murders this poor Sons of the Harpy, who is probably going to get murdered anyway, but Khaleesi decides that she has to sentence the freedmen for killing a prisoner who was defenseless and had done nothing after being captured but cooperate. So she decides to execute the freedmen representative, which they do. They behead him, and that does not go over well at all. The slaves and the highborn fight against one another. For comfort after this really hard day, Daenerys goes to see her dragons in the basement of the pyramid that she's living in. And unfortunately, they are wild and fearsome creatures after having been locked up in the dark for so long. And Dany returns to her chambers. While she's outside on her balcony, we see Drogon behind her. And he kind of is there. It's almost as if he's watching over her a little bit, giving her some extra comfort, but he flies away before she can really speak to him or touch him or get a good look at how he is after being in the wild for so long. At this point, the next day, there's more discussion on opening the pits with Hizdahr, advocating that the tradition will help her and will help Meereen. At this point as well, Khaleesi says no. Later that afternoon, Sir Barristan tells Khaleesi some stories about Rhaegar and his kind-heartedness and his wisdom, and that he was a lover of music and would play music in the streets, and any money he earned playing this music, he would donate to the poor, give away to help other people. And then eventually he tells the story of Rhaegar Targaryen winning this tournament at Harrenhal. We keep hearing mentions of this, and Rhaegar giving the crown of the Queen of Love and Beauty at this tournament to a woman that's not his wife. And we learn later from Littlefinger that that woman was actually Ned Stark's sister, Lyanna Stark. And so Barristan basically tells Dany that Rhaegar started a war for the love he held this woman. And Dany is amazed that her brother was so different and so sensitive and so caring after the stories she grew up with from her other brother, the crazy Viserys. And we see her see Rhaegar in a different light, and we see her see ruling in a different light. She has a little bit of an epiphany here. The next day, during a patrol, Grey Worm and his men are ambushed by Sons of the Harpy, and everyone's killed except Grey Worm. At this point, Grey Worm's fighting like 3 or 4 dudes at a time. Sir Barristan comes along and helps him out, and in the process gets himself killed. Now, Grey Worm is gravely injured and is recuperating under the care of Missandei, who is Khaleesi's little assistant. And poor Sir Barristan is murdered, and they hold a funeral for him. And in revenge, Khaleesi collects all the leaders of the great families of Meereen, takes them into the pit where her dragons are, and feeds one of them to her dragons to terrify the living shit out of all of them. And it works. They're all very scared, and they understand that, this is not cool. She's going to murder all of us. When she has a change of heart, sends all of the men back to the dungeons. And at this point, she goes to Hizdahr Zolorak's cell, tells him that she's going to reopen the pits, And she also is going to marry him in order to bring peace and tradition and a solid ruling team to Meereen. Surprise! That will be an interesting plot line that will unfold along the way. But all in all, that is what's happened from now until the beginning of the season, until this most recent episode. Next week, I think we'll see more of Arya, who at the moment is in the House of Black and White. She has been training there with the Braavosi men, and we'll see how her plotline continues, because we really haven't seen much from her lately. And any questions, feel free to text me. Bye!